So here we are, 4 stages of company growth. Again, remember, ask all your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them. I'm sure we're going to have plenty of time today. And if you haven't listened to our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Matthew and I try to do one every single week, permitting that our schedules align, and we're usually in the office at the same time. But we send those out almost every week, and so we'd love for you to subscribe there. And then, Matthew, why don't you talk a little bit about why we do the webinars?
Yeah, we'll talk about this and then we'll jump right into the content because this content's super important if you want to grow your business. Just some lessons we've learned over the years. The first thing is, like, when we're EOS followers, and when we think about what our why, what Simon Sinek would call our why, what is our passion? Our passion is developing people personally and professionally. And the industry conferences and industry speakers have done a great job of developing us. And we feel like it's really important to give back to the industry. And so that's why we do these things, because we've made a lot of mistakes, and we really feel like if we can help other people get started with way less mistakes and help them be successful, that's important to us. Our point is there's just plenty of houses or plenty of real estate for everybody to manage. The second thing here is what I call the rising tide. Is anytime we can improve and professionalize the industry, it's going to benefit all of us, especially those of us that are doing a good job and doing the right things. And so anything we can do to help professionalize the industry, I think ultimately is going to help all of us manage more homes and help control the narrative in the industry. And then the last thing is the purely selfish piece of this is, at some point we do buy businesses, and look, there's no expectation that y'all are going to sell us your business. But at some point, if you decide, hey, I'm thinking about selling my business, our hope is that you'll just reach out to us and put us on the short list of people you talk to, because we've bought almost 30 businesses over the course of the last decade. And it's just one way we grow and one way we've been able to expand our business. But speaking of expanding our business, I think it's really important we get straight to the content.
All right, let's do it.
So I talked about EOS earlier, which is a Gino Wickman thing. A lot of people in the property management industry follow EOS, and that's like what we followed when we started growing the organization. But there's another book out there called Scaling Up, and this guy, Verne Harnish, is similar to Gino Wickman in that he created a system he calls the Rockefeller habits. And this is like a book. I probably read this book for the first time 7 or 8 years ago. It was really getting into EOS. And when I read it, it was super confusing to me because I think it was overly complicated. And so the Scaling Up, Verne's business, his system, if you will, is a more robust version of, it's not specifically EOS, but it's like a more complicated version for bigger businesses. What Gino Wickman would say is the EOS model really gets you through about 350 team members. And then Verne's Scaling Up model, or Rockefeller Habits model, has taken businesses public before, a little more robust system. But one of the things he says in his book, Scaling Up, which is a fantastic read, I think everybody should, if you've not read the book Traction, you should read that first, depending on the size of your org. But if you want to continue reading and you're starting to bump up against 200, 300, 400 people, Scaling Up is definitely something you should read. But his point is that businesses grow from plateau to plateau. I think a lot of the misunderstanding about businesses is, everything, as soon as you find it, it's like up and to the right. And when we first set our 10-year goal to grow to 25,000 doors, in my mind, I was like, hey, we'll just add 2,000 doors a year, or 2,100 doors a year. And then we'll be 10,000 or 25,000 doors at the end of 10 years, like really easy, right? You probably know this, but I didn't know it at the time. But businesses just don't grow like that. Our experience has been, it was very slow growing, and then it's been fairly exponential since then. But businesses will grow from plateau to plateau, and they also don't just like stay going up like that. Like they plateau, and then it's almost like the business digests, or perhaps something macro causes it to be plateaued, and then it goes up again. And so if you'll click to the next slide, here's a version. This is a snapshot out of his book. And I think it really tells the story of the 4 stages of growth. Interestingly enough, this is something I came to separately because I candidly teach this to our organization. As you can imagine, as we grow the organization, you've got to move people up from being an individual contributor all the way to being a leader of a number of people, of a bit of a profit center, if you will. But he said, if you'll flip one more, basically, these are the facts. First one is there's 28 million companies in the US. And this book's probably 2 or 3 years old, so I don't know if that's exactly right, but I think the directional point is the same. The next slide, the next thing says 4% of all companies reach $1 million in revenue. So think about that in the context of your business. If you're north of $1 million in revenue, only 4% of all organizations ever reach that. So that's like 96% of people don't make it to $1 million. You've heard the statistics about how many companies fail, but just to get to 1 million is an incredible accomplishment. In fact, I can remember walking my dog and thinking, wow, if I ever get to $1 million in revenue, I will actually be a CEO of a company. Like it just felt like it was so hard to get there. I just like longed for the day when the company did $1 million in revenue. And so that is like very fresh on my mind. About a decade ago, I was just longing to be one of the 4%. Another thing I wanted to be is like on the Inc. 5,000, right? And to do that, you need to have at least $1 million in revenue. So these are like the things that maybe you're thinking about that I was thinking about at that time. And it was very exciting, and, thinking through, what if I could get this thing to $1 million? Yep, but 0.4% of all companies, so that's what, 4 in 1,000 make it to 10 million in revenue. So that's, if you're watching this and your company is 10 million in revenue, you are like a 1 in 1,000 or a 4 in 1,000 companies. I guess a 1 in 250 company. I think that's right. If that math's not right. Point being, number one, you don't need math to grow the business. Number two, you are in rarefied air if you've made it to 10 million. And then the last one here is 50 million. So 0.06 of all companies reach 50 million in revenue. And so if you'll click that one last thing, the big reveal is only 1 in 17,000 companies make it to 50 million in revenue. And Evernest is north of 50 million. I like to tell our team, hey, look, we're in rarefied air here, being 1 in 17,000 companies. But I think the point here is that this is really freaking hard to do. It's 1 in 17,000 companies get to 50 million. It ain't easy to do. And candidly, like if only 1 in 250 companies get to 10 million, that's not easy to do either. And if you said, hey, I'm going to take a 1 in 17,000 chance of winning the lottery, obviously we would do that, but you probably wouldn't sign up for it and invest all your money on the 1 in 17,000 chance. But that's what we do when we become entrepreneurs and try to grow a business. I guess the point is, this is actually a really hard thing to do, but I do believe that some of the strategies to get there are fairly simple, and it really is all about mastering it. So we're going to talk about how we think about the 4 stages of growth. Ironically, if you'll flip back up to that slide before where the plateaus, the 4 stages of growth follow this. And so we've identified some skills that you need to master. And we'll talk about it as it relates to property management, but some skills that you need to master to get from call it 1 million in revenue up through, or how to get to 1 million in revenue, candidly, up through 50 million in revenue. And these are the things that we've learned to get to where we are today.
Why does Vern call it the Valley of Death, Matthew?
Yeah, because a few things. Number one is I think it takes for the leader, it takes a metamorphosis of who they are, a skill set. And so a lot of leaders get lost. The difference between a $10 million company and a $1 million is a $10 million company is not 10 $1 million companies. It's just an altogether different beast. And as you can imagine, the difference between a $1 million company and a $50 million company is significantly different as well. So as you're thinking, as we're talking here, just a reminder, there is a Q&A section. We're going to assume that most people that are watching that are somewhere south of 10 million. So we're going to anchor down on there. We are going to talk about we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes north of that, but we're going to spend most of our time telling you how we started with one market and grew it from one market.
So this is it, stage one.
Yep, stage one is, let's say, up to $1 million. When I think about stage one, when we first started our podcast, we talked about going from 300 to 3,000 properties. And one of the funny things was, like, when we started, we were at 2,500 properties. So we assumed we were going to get to 3,000, even though we hadn't already gotten to 3,000. The good news is we got to 3,000 and we weren't liars. But most property management companies, depending on the market, are somewhere around 200 to 400 units. And we started our podcast with the idea, which is basically what we're talking about here, is like, how do you grow your business past that? It felt like there was a lid. You can see it just in the data, right? Where only 4% of companies get past $1 million. And so what did it take to get past that $1 million? So we're going to talk about 3 things. I don't think any of these are going to be shocking to you, but we're going to talk about 3 things that we have found and 3 things we ask our individual contributors to do it here at Evernest. The first thing that I would say, zoom out, there's really 2 reasons that owners fire you. The first one is lack of execution, like not getting the job done. And the second one is lack of communication. So I'm sure if you've had an owner fire you, which if you've been in this business more than a month, you've probably had an owner fire you already. And communication and execution are the reasons that they fire you. So to get up to $1 million in revenue, I think you really need to be a great property manager, candidly. And $1 million in revenue is about call it 500 homes, depending on if you have a really robust maintenance business or not. And so step one is execution. When I say execution too, it is about being able to manage multiple things at one time and prioritize really well. Great execution is not just like first in, first out. It's like saying, hey, here's my list of things that I need to do today, or here's my list of things I need to get done, and being able to really prioritize. Gary Keller, who wrote the book, The One Thing, and he also started Keller Williams, has a great like saying, like he says, what one thing can I do that makes all these other things easier or not necessary? And so being a great property manager, being a great individual contributor is all about great execution. And so
Matthew, you're taking yourself back to that stage, right? When you started Evernest in 2008, you started managing a few houses, 30 houses, and grew from there. What did that look like for you because I think there was just like 2 of you, and then you had a bookkeeper.
Yeah, there was 2 essentially like property managers, and then we had a bookkeeper.
What is great execution? Because you talked about doing a lot of different things. Does that mean you were doing pretty much everything in the business, leasing, everything?
Yeah, I think of property management as like a lot of checklists. And it's mastery over the checklist. It's being able to anticipate what needs to be done and doing it before anybody asks you to do it. It is, and the people on this call are probably really good at this. Like, I was a great property manager because I owned a bunch of homes, right? I owned the 30 houses that we started Evernest with. And so I just intuitively knew what needed to be done. And so that was what made me great, because I also understood the investor's mindset and what he or she wanted me to do. I would because I wanted that done, I would do it before they ever.
You were actually probably doing it to your houses as well as doing it to their houses.
That's right. I can remember the first time because I got into the property management business by selling houses to investors and then keeping the management. And I never intended on being a third-party manager just for other people. And I can remember the first time I ran into this investment group that there was they had a bunch of mortgages that went bad during the recession here or during the GFC. And they basically, I don't think they paid me, but they like asked me a lot of questions about their 70 homes that they had to foreclose on. And they were like, what do we do with this? They're from all over the place, Phoenix and a bunch of different places. And they, at the end of this meeting together, they basically said, you are going to manage these houses. And because when I understood their pain points,
Yeah.
so it was really easy for me to speak their language. This is one of the challenges as you scale your organization. Developing empathy for owners is really important as well in your org. And great execution is about seeing the business through the eyes of the owner. We talk about this actually. It's one of the principles we tell our team to manage by. We have a daily principle that we go through every day in Huddle. And one of our principles is act like an owner. And we think of that in two ways. The first one is act like an owner, like you own the property. How would you think about handling this situation? And then the other one is act like you own Evernest. Like, how would you think about this problem through the lens of owning Evernest? So great execution is just all about owning another one of our core values, owning the outcome.
Good. Yeah. I was thinking about that as well. Just thinking about the difficulty as you start hiring people, I know we're in stage one, but as you go from stage one to stage two, you start managing people. And if you're hiring people who haven't ever owned rental property, or maybe they're fresh out of school or whatever, they just don't have that context. And so not only is the execution going to be a little tricky, but the empathy probably isn't there. We know the pain of somebody calling and saying, hey, you need a new AC unit. It's going to be $5,000. Like, we know that pain and we empathize. And so there's a certain way you have to break news to owners. And I think that's the difficult thing as you grow. It's hard to teach. You can teach it when they're around you and you hear it in the office every day, but it's much more difficult as you scale and you're not with the person every day.
Yeah, I think, and heck, we can also, if we've been in the business a long time, lose sight of the fact that when you pick up the phone and have to tell that owner that they need a new HVAC unit, like that owner thought they had $5,000 in the pocket, and then you're calling and telling them they don't. And you've got to make sure that you deliver that message with a lot of empathy. All right, next thing.
From execution to client communication.
Yeah, look, again, two things always get you fired. The first one's just screwing up the checklist and not getting crap done. The second one is all about client communication. Once you get great execution down, you got to do a great job of communication with your clients and frankly, with your residents, your customers. Great communication to me is about anticipating the question. If you can build trust with your owners and with your residents by anticipating the next question, some of this can actually be built into technology, and some of the technology providers do a really good job of that. For instance, Property Meld, I think, does a really good job of this on the maintenance side, right? Like increasing the efficiency of communication provides transparency. And technology, when I think about communication, don't just think, oh, I'm picking up the phone and calling my client. That definitely is a piece of it, but it's everything from owner statements to emails that you send them. It is basically when an owner is receiving information from the organization, making sure that number one, it's correct. There's nothing worse than screwing up an owner statement and having to be embarrassed because you applied the wrong $500 bill to the wrong house. So make sure, like, that is great communication when you make sure those owner statements are 100% correct. Making sure that you anticipate when you're communicating with someone, with an owner, what are they going to ask? What are the follow-up questions they're going to ask? One of the things we measure in emails is how many emails are like tennis where they just get bounced back and forth, or how many emails are one response closeout emails. If you think about it, great communication. If you ask me a question and I not only answer that, but then I answer the potential 3 or 4 follow-up questions, number one, you're going to be like, oh, this guy gets me. Number two, you're going to be like, wow, I really trust this person because this person has done a fantastic job. Like, they get me and they're already thinking ahead. And so I don't need to think ahead, right? And when they have to ask that other question, they think they're thinking ahead, even though you may be already thinking that. You can go ahead and anticipate the next question and solve it and or close the loop on it. I think what'll end up happening is you'll start to build a ton of trust.
Yeah.
One of the great things about great communication, and you should really do this early in the relationship, is when you do it, you build trust, and it actually cuts down on the total amount of communication you'll have to do with that person. Because if they trust you, they don't ask a lot of questions, right? And so this is the reason you would open up your books from a transparency standpoint, where somebody could come in and see their account in live action, because it builds trust, cuts down on communication.
Yeah, when I think of communication, also something that I've noticed is you have to be also very careful, especially in a day when we like to automate as much as possible. And so if you're using a email system or a support ticketing system that you can just hit auto replies, you need to be careful who's writing those. Because what happens is you get more and more people in the company, more and more people start writing these auto reply. And if you're not auditing those, if you're not checking on them, then guess what? You're going to start saying, you will be saying things, your team will be saying things to clients that you probably would have said a lot different. And so just be careful, because there's all kinds of forms of communication going out there. If you're using systems to text, to email, not just phone calls, to me, that's a really important part of it, and probably should be part of onboarding and talking to your team about the right way and the wrong way to communicate.
About 4 years ago, we changed from GK Houses, which was our old name, to Evernest. And I swear 2 years in, we were still sending emails with GK Houses on it, right? It's that's just that you want to talk about something that doesn't build trust, but also making sure that if you automate those emails, and Spencer hit on this, but I think you want to make sure that you're, even if you did write all of them, that you have some sort of process for going back and reviewing them, because you may completely change a process and all these automated emails are going out, and then like you set expectations one way with the client, and then you change the process and are doing it completely different. We've made that mistake over and over again. And so make sure that as you're doing this, that you're taking the time to go back consistently, because your processes are going to change. If there's anything we've learned on scaling an organization, you're just going to change the way you do things over and over again. And you want to make sure that you're doing a great job of communication, even in the automated communication as well.
All right. Last thing here, hustle.
Number 3, like we have a culture core value here called embrace the grind. Listen, for you to push past this $1 million in revenue, you are going to have to just grind. It is not a property management as you scale it from 0 to 1 is something that Peter Thiel would say. As you scale it from 0 to 1, you are going to have to be willing to work after hours, work Saturdays. A perfect example was, as I was growing the organization, my Monday through Friday was spent in the business, right? Because I was doing all this execution and communication and just trying to keep the wheels on for the week. But for what I found is that on the weekends, that things would slow down and that I could work on the business in the weekends. And you've heard this from probably a number of people, like working in the business versus working on the business. And if you want to scale an organization, you're going to have to spend some quality time working on the business. And what I would do, we actually found a great vendor named Planet Synergy. They're still like a fantastic vendor of ours. I've been with them over a decade. And Anu over there, like they're over in India. And so they were doing some what we call ITM work now. Some people call it virtual assistant, VAs, or RTMs, another lingo, industry lingo. But the point is, I was basically would take Saturdays and I would take one process every Saturday and I would just write this very detailed process. And then I would hand it off to PSI, Planet Synergy. And then I would go back to my Monday through Friday. I'd get caught up on Saturday and then I'd go back to my Monday through Friday. And then I'd take another process. And it's not too dissimilar to Jim Collins's flywheel. When you like hand off one process, it doesn't make a meaningful difference. But then if I hand off, call it, if I did that 40 Saturdays in a year, before you know it, that flywheel really starts get going fast, because now you're starting to take your work, and you don't have to hand it off to an ITM or some sort of virtual. You may hand it off to somebody domestically. You may hand it off, delegate it to a team member. But the point is, like, I was spending time on Saturdays working on the business, because my Monday through Fridays I was in the battle right there. I was in the grind, executing and communicating. And so, point being, if you're going to push past that, you're going to have to work 6 days a week. But my advice to you is, don't work 6 days a week in the business. You should take that extra day and use that as like on the business stuff, so that you can start to develop and mold an actual organization.
I'm curious, Matthew. I don't know if we've ever talked about this because you and Brian, he's a property manager. He's out showing houses, putting signs in yards, all those things. You're in the office for the most part. You may be going and showing houses as well, but you take walk-ins, you're handling all kinds of things. How did you have time to do sales? Like, how did you think about marketing? Because we're talking about growing your business, right? So it's not only just running your 200 to 300 doors, but you really want to grow those. So how were you setting aside time just to focus on sales and marketing as well? Or was it just, hey, I organically took it as it came?
Yeah.
A lot of your growth come from referrals from people who are already your clients.
I got a lot of referrals in the early days. I mean, as you know, when we first got started, or when I first got started, I was in the industry already. You and I were buying and selling houses, and I just had a lot of industry contacts. So a lot of my early days were referrals.
Gotcha.
And so call it 2013, 2014, 2015, probably started doing a little bit of marketing. I remember shooting a video that you laugh at right now, about an interview video, and so kind of like our early content story.
Yeah.
But I think I was more reactive, candidly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Good.
Probably something I could have prioritized, but when we hired Lavelle, it really started to. That's when we got really focused on marketing and sales.
Sales, that's right. Then you hired a BDM after that.
Yeah, and then I hired this like killer marketing guru that has been with me ever since.
And then I came on board after that person.
That's right. We fired.
All right, you ready for the next?
Do it. Yeah. How about this? Maybe we should say, are there any questions about go back one. Are there any questions about getting to 1 million in revenue? Keep in mind, there's like a Q&A section. All right. I don't see any questions. So
fantastic.
I must have done a darn good job of explaining it.
Incredible job.
All right, let's go to the next one. All right, 1 to 3 million. So think about this as, we do have a question. Seth would like to know, what do you mean by spending time on process, increasing the efficiency of process for your employees to follow? Example, inspections. And if this is what you mean, did you start with larger processes, perspectives, and work your way down, or work on smaller processes and work your way up? Yes, Seth, great question. I think what I would work on is the ones that are very repetitive, very clear, very definable first. I think this is how I thought about it. In other words, if there was like a clear process in my head and all I had to do was put it down on paper, and then I could teach somebody step by step how to do that and have a fairly predictable outcome. A perfect example of that would be probably like, other than the marketing description, call it like listing a property, putting a property on a website. We used to have to physically go to all the websites and put them on there. Now for a while, they just shoot them to all those different locations. So I would say, step 1, put the address in, and this is how I want the address to look. Step 2, this, like something that was very clear and could have a tangible outcome, and then I could check that. That's how I would think about it. I would think about stuff like, what are you doing that's fairly repetitive that somebody could do it over and over again? and then get those off your plate first. And then you can move up to more complicated processes where you need to teach people. But that kind of like bottom repetitive, do it over and over again stuff, that was the first stuff I think I moved off my plate. There's also a great exercise called the delegate and elevate exercise. We've talked a lot about it actually in the last 2 or 3 months. It's an EOS idea. And what it would say is, what are the things you're doing that you don't enjoy? And what are the things that you do that you're not good at? That's not exactly how it says it, but point being is go back through your calendar and find out what you don't enjoy, what you're not good at, and spend time moving those off your plate first too.
Yeah.
All right.
You want to answer that J.R. Miller?
Yeah, why don't we like a marketing question? Let's save that for last if we get to it. All right, moving on. JR, we definitely will answer that. We'll just get to work on our core content, and then we definitely will answer all questions at the end. We'll stick around. All right, so once you move past $1 million, like $1 million is all about how good are you? And then all of a sudden there's the kind of like valley of death is what Vern would call it. But then there's like this kind of like metamorphosis that you have to take from an individual contributor into a manager. And I think if you've never read the book E-Myth, Michael Gerber talks a lot about this. Just because I'm a great fixer of cars, like a technician, automobile technician, does not make me a great owner of a car shop. Just because I'm a great chef does not make me a great owner of a business, right? And so we intuitively know that. But what happens here is the same thing holds true. Just because I'm a great property manager does not mean that I'm a great property management company owner. And but my point to some people is, if you like the idea of staying at $1 million in revenue, and I think that business can probably run at somewhere around $400,000 to $500,000 a year in like profit to the owner, maybe more. I've heard some insane things. It's a pretty darn good income to manage 300 to 500 houses, right? Like there is no shame. If that's what you want, I call it like a boutique. And I actually think for decades that boutique management business will be around. So if you say, hey, this is too hard, I don't want to do it, I get it. Or why would I want to grow a business and have a bunch of team members? I actually enjoy the property management piece. And you want to be the Michael Jordan of property management? By all means, go do that, because you can make an incredible living doing that. You can also be a resource for your investors to buy more houses, make brokerage fees. I just know a lot of people have done that very successfully, and kudos to them for living the life that they want to live. If you're like me and you say, I want to own or lead a great property management business, you're going to have to go from being a great property manager to being a great manager of people. And so step one of that is, how do we get from 500 to 1,500 homes, or 300 to about 1,500 homes? And what you've got to be now is more like a great manager. And so there are 3 things that I would think about as it relates to great manager. Some of this is EOS words, but I'll put it into words so everybody can understand it. The first one is what we call leading level 10. A level 10 meeting is EOS words for just a weekly meeting. A lot of people say, oh, meetings are dumb, you don't need meetings. But if you're going to scale an organization, you do need to run meetings. Patrick Lencioni talks about, he has a great book out there called Death by Meeting. And his point is, the reason meetings are boring is because leaders aren't doing a great job of running meetings. And what makes a great meeting is that there is dialogue and debate and conflict, just like a great movie. And the other thing he says is, as a leader, the weekly meeting, or as a manager, the weekly meeting is one of the most important things you can do. It's almost like your game time, right? Because you get your team around you, and that's the time where you're solving issues and making sure that problems don't reoccur, and writing processes to make sure that doesn't happen again. And people are bringing you ideas and, hey, we should implement this. And you're like processing it with your team. And the reason meetings are boring is because you're not getting much done. But great meetings are very powerful and they're a big leverage point as well. So Spencer, any thoughts? You
Yeah,
run.
I was just thinking if they're done correctly, what this also achieves is it allows you to focus and get work done without people popping in your office and talking for 20 or 30 minutes about this issue that they have. You essentially start collecting all the issues and saying, hey, all of us are going to be together for this hour and a half, and we're going to solve these issues. We're going to talk about these things. And it lets you get work done as opposed to just like always stopping, always having people bump into each other in the hallway and talking for 10 minutes about something. Because this is what we did, especially in the early days, as we were growing, as we were moving from into the second stage, we were just always talking about drop that issue down. Let's talk about it. And it really is amazing once you get people in a room solving problems together with healthy debating, with healthy, just not, I don't want to say arguing, but disagreeing.
Conflict.
Yeah, conflict, healthy conflict, and then walking away saying, you know what, I may disagree, but I may not agree, but I'm going to commit to this, and we're all going to do it together. I think those were some special times. And I just remember those early days as we were like all in our offices, everybody had headphones on, everybody was cranking, and then we would just get together that one time a week and knock as much stuff out as we could.
Yeah, most issues can wait, right? There may be some things that are fires that blow up that you need to jump on, but most issues can wait. And I think solving them in a very efficient manner. The other thing that I was going to add to what you were saying is it's also a great time in your weekly meetings to explain the why. Like you solve an issue with some people that have been here for a while, but you generally, as you're starting to grow an organization, are always going to have new people. And what is the why? Why did we solve it like this? And give them some history of, you're going to find that's a great education by osmosis by having a lot of people in those level 10, or call it the weekly meetings.
Yeah.
So first thing I would say is you've got to be, and frankly, we judge our managers and leaders by how well they run a level 10 meeting, right? We ask them to record it. We go down and we'll watch it and just see how well are they mastering the level 10 or their weekly meeting? Are they following the process, asking good questions? Are they getting buy-in? Are they asking their team to help, or is it just them dictating? Like these are the things I can tell a healthy market for us by just watching that level 10 meeting.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Our next thing is one-to-ones. Leading a level 10 is all about like the organization. The one-to-one is all about developing the people in the organization one by one. And so one of the things that we have found is that when we first of all show a team member that we care, one of the things about the one-to-one is I get to spend time with the person and show them as their leader or as their manager, I actually care about them. And the one-to-one is not for me per se. It is actually for the person that the one-to-one. I actually had one of these this morning, and I should do very little of the talking, maybe some question asking, maybe some question answering. But all the one-to-one is really the power of the one-to-one is if the person that comes into the one-to-one is ready for it. And our one-to-ones are very simple. What did you accomplish last month? What are you going to accomplish next month? Are you buying into our core values? And how can you improve? That's it. We do that monthly, and we come in and there's also a fifth question that's 360-degree feedback. Hey, how can I, as your leader, you give me feedback on how I can improve? And so I was in it with a guy today, and he was giving me feedback on how I could improve as his leader. And if we're going to do this, we got to develop these deep relationships with our team. And when they trust you, and a lot of this is built in one-to-ones, it allows you to coach them very hard. And I actually just told my organization about a coach that I had. And one of my coaches was just great at building relationships with us in high school. And he was very passionate about the type of person we would become. And he wanted us to be great baseball players on the field, but also like great people off the field. It was more important that we were great people off the field. And because we knew he cared about us on the field, he could coach us very hard because we didn't have the expectation that he was just trying to win baseball games. We had the expectation that he cared about us and wanted us to be good people. When I think about coaching my team, when I develop deep trust with the guys and gals on my team, then that allows me to coach them very hard. And it's just a really healthy relationship like that. And when I coach them hard, they don't think, oh, Matthew doesn't like me. They actually think Matthew likes me a whole bunch because he really has high expectations of me.
Yeah, I thought about this. McKenna, who's here helping out in the chat, I had my one-to-one with McKenna just Monday, and it is a fantastic time just to continue to foster and build trust, have just that one-on-one time where you're hearing from them. It's great to see all the things that they accomplish in a month and then talk about, hey, what's coming next. I also was thinking about, speaking to your point about coaching people, I can remember at the end of last year, at the end of 2023, sitting down with McKenna towards the end of the year and just talking about, hey, this is what I really love to see from you and have you take responsibility for. Because she had crushed her role, but really what she needed to do was expand her role and grow more because we needed more out of our small marketing department. And I just challenged her. And this year she's absolutely crushed it, like by just expanding her role and going above and beyond. So I think that's also part of, just like you said, challenging, but then also celebrating when they do things really well and crush it.
Yeah, I think you and your team and McKenna and Kayleen hit a new organic high, I heard last week, in terms of leads. That's incredible. I think when you become a great manager, your goal is to get more things done through others, right? Like the whole point is like this pushes past the point of you being able to do everything into, okay, now I can't do everything, but I know the right things to do. How do I make sure that the team that I hire and develop, that they do the right things, right? Because how do I get the same things I was doing now that the business is bigger, I can't do all of them, done through others? What happens a lot of times is you get in this like pressure of the growth and you start to hire people and do a really poor job of training them. And then what happens is you start to churn units and then you realize, oh, you basically go back down to where you feel comfortable. And that's fine if you decide ultimately, again, like I said earlier, I want to be a boutique property manager. I don't like the managing a bunch of people. That's great. This is the point where you need to start thinking about, how do I make sure this person is 100% trained? How do I make sure that this person is going to do the things that I want them to do, whether that's processes or great training? And then it gets into, you also want to see it in number 3, which is what we call the audits and scorecards, right? Like, how do you measure what gets done and then make sure that, like, when you measure it is happening to your expectations? And so audits, I think of as, we actually have what we call the property manager success checklist, where we say, hey, we want you to do these things during the day. And these are daily things we want you to do. These are weekly things we want you to do. These are monthly things we want you to do. And so we ask our property managers to go through that success checklist. It's like an audit. And then we ask the managers to audit to make sure that it gets done, inspect what you expect. And so that's a piece of our organization. The other thing is like more of an output where it's like, hey, here's a scorecard. So when we go into a weekly meeting, we'll hit the scorecard first and say what numbers are on track and what numbers are off track. And we look at the KPIs or key performance indicators of our business and say, where are the things we need to work on, or where are the things we maybe need to talk about in level 10? But the scoreboard or the scorecard should show you where things are going wrong. And then that way you can go, and we think of scorecard in weekly metrics. I think it's very important to, as quickly as possible, fix the problem. A lot of people will think of it in monthly, and I just think monthly is too long. You think about losing a month in something like leasing, and all of a sudden you've lost a month of revenue for an owner. So we think in terms of weekly scorecards, and we think in terms of daily audits, and what we call success checklist is more of a proactive way. And then scorecards is, hey, we're being somewhat reactive, but we're not waiting forever to let the dust settle. As soon as we see it on the scorecard, we're going to go back and fix it.
It's really interesting, Matthew, because I think we started, or when you introduced scorecards to the company a long time ago, we just had a few things that we were watching. But talk about a little bit about how, as the company grows, you need to be looking at more and more metrics, like everybody having at least one number that they're tracking.
Yep. Yeah. So what I would say is, like, up until $1 million, you probably only have a scorecard for an organization, like one, and it's big enough for it has 10 to 12 numbers that you're tracking on a weekly basis. And then as you grow the organization and you start to have departments, so you can imagine we have a whole property accounting department, which has about 25 people in it. They need their own scorecard. And so the leader of that organization has a scorecard that she's put together. You talk about like human resources, or what we would call talent and culture. They have things that they're like, how fast are we hiring people when we need them? How well are we training them? There's all sorts of things that we're constantly tracking. As you grow the organization, you start to break these apart, and you obviously have a scorecard in marketing that y'all go through. But what I would say is start with one, and then I would probably break it into three, which is accounting and finance, marketing and sales, and then operations. And then as you continue to grow the organization, you would start to split those things up.
All right, we have a question here. I see Elizabeth has asked, how do you assess the effectiveness of a leader's one-to-one meetings? What criteria or methods do you use to evaluate how well managers are conducting these meetings?
Yeah, that's a great question, Elizabeth. Really, because you're not in that meeting, and it's really hard to know how well those meetings are going. So I'll tell you a few things we do. Number one is, and we've talked a little bit about this over the last couple of months, every quarter, one of our one-to-ones includes a people analyzer. And the people analyzer is an EOS thing, and it basically asks if they buy into our core values. And then it also asks, do they get it? Do they want it? They have capacity to do it. That is actually done in writing, and allows us to see how good the feedback is that they're giving their team member. Now, if the team member's failing and they're not giving good feedback in a people analyzer, that to me is a failure of the manager. But it is hard for us. All of our one-to-ones are written down in our property management software, but our human resources software. So you could use something like a Google form to recreate this, but the ones that I typically will review is on a quarterly basis. Just make sure that somebody has the guts to give great coaching and great feedback to the team member. And so pieces of this ought to be written down for sure. Yeah, and McKenna just popped in the people analyzer. That's one way you can force your team to give actionable feedback. And if you disagree with that, if you can see 2 layers down that this person's not doing that, and this manager in the middle, when you ask him or her to write it down, is not willing to write it down, then there's probably a problem.
There's a problem. That's right. All right.
Well, I mean, one of the hard things about becoming a manager is the fact that you have to give constructive feedback. This is part of the job, right? Can you just imagine hiring the New York Knicks, hiring a basketball coach, and the basketball coach is scared to give his players feedback? That doesn't make any sense. And one of the reasons we don't give feedback is not because we care about the person and we care about their feelings. We actually care about our own comfort. And so in my opinion, the most loving thing you can do to the team members that you manage is give them feedback, because they want to do a good job. If you're hiring the right people, which I think is pretty important, We'll talk about that because as you scale the organization, hiring the right people is important. But let's assume that you're hiring the right people. They're going to want feedback. Like
Yeah.
Spencer craves feedback because Spencer doesn't want to be the same level he is next year that he is this year. And I crave feedback like from Spencer. Hey, how can I? But just because I may manage Spencer in the organization does not mean Spencer can't tell me how to become a better leader because I'm on this journey too. And if he tells me, hey, you need to do this and I can make me a better leader to grow the organization, that's very powerful. John Maxwell has a principle he talks about called the law of the lid. And he says that an organization will never grow bigger than the leader lid. The leader is a lid on it. You may grow the organization past the leader, but it'll always shrink to the size of the leader. And so when I think about growing or a manager, when I think about a manager, if we need to keep pushing our manager's skills up, and that way he or she can lead a larger organization. That was a long answer to that.
All right, you ready for level 3?
Yeah. Is there any other questions specific to being a great manager, that kind of like 1 to 3 million? I think a lot of people get stuck right here. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bunch of questions right here. I would actually tell y'all too, you may say, it can't be this easy. I'm telling you, it is actually this easy to push past 3 million in revenue. Now there's marketing things you got to do and sales and, property man, but at the end of the day, it is all about getting things done through people. And the better you are, the more effective you are at getting things done through people, your business is going to naturally grow as a result of that.
Yeah.
All right. No questions thus far for that. All right, let's keep moving on here. 3 to 10 million. We're not going to spend too much time here. My guess is there's probably only 1 to 2 people even on this call that are north of 3 million.
What's the door count here? What's the door count here? Like 1,500 to?
Yeah, it's north of 1,500. I would think of it as like 1,500 to 5,000.
Gotcha.
All right, number 1 is recruit A players. I think this is an overly, like when I say this, you probably go tone deaf and don't want to hear it. But I can't overemphasize one of the great football coaches of all time, Lou Holtz, once said, I've coached bad players and I've coached good players, and I was always a better coach with good players. And let me tell you, as a leader of an organization, I have had bad people and I've had good people, and I have looked like a better leader with good people. And so you have got to figure out a way to hire high quality A players onto your team. Now, a few ways I would do that. If somebody was saying, well, how do I do that? I would read the book Who. Yeah, you're already, maybe drop that in there, McKenna. I would read the book Who and follow that. Or if you don't have some sort of like hiring process, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel on a hiring process. But Who was a game changer for us probably 6 or 7 years ago. When we started implementing the Who, we started getting way more predictable A players to join the team.
It was 9 years ago.
How long?
It was 9. Duncan was the first person hired with the grinder, and he's been here 9 years.
That's funny. We actually called it the grinder just because we felt like sometimes the interview process was so hard, it felt like a meat grinder. And it was pretty funny because we would ask, from time to time, we would actually ask some of the questions and people would just freak out and hang up on the phone interview. The first step's the phone interview. And we were in Slack. We've been in Slack for almost a decade now. And we had this kind of like,
The
you
GIF.
call it a GIF that would
GIF,
basically
yeah.
say it was Homer Simpson's head exploding, wasn't it?
Was,
And
yeah.
so that would be when they would start to struggle, me and Spencer would slack each other that. And it was pretty funny. You have to gamify it and make it fun.
Yeah.
But the great thing second thing about interviewing is just like anything, like I sucked at interviewing really early. That was when Spencer got on the team. So he beat me before I was good at interviewing.
Stuck on.
But point being is it ultimately is a reps game. The more people you interview, the better you are at identifying. And so I would actually go and say, if I haven't interviewed somebody in a long time, I would go interview 10 or 20 people, do a phone interview before you even make a hire. Because, and I know that sounds like a lot, but I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to pick 3 resumes and then pick the best of that. Our experience has been you probably need to do 10 interviews to find 1 or 2 people that get through the phone screen. And then it's half the people make it through the face-to-face, and then half the people make it through the cultural interview. And so it's like maybe a 1 in 20. So when you're talking about like the top 5 or 10%, you have to at least interview 10 people to get the top 10%, right? That's just like an easy math problem. And the second thing or the third thing I would say is, when you feel a little bit intimidated and when you're hiring somebody, that is a great sign that person is a great person to hire. Because all the great people that I've hired, I have felt a little bit intimidated when I was talking to them. My impression was that they were going to come into Evernest and think, good gosh, this place is a mess. Why in the world did I quit that safe, secure job over there, coming into Evernest, and it was just like a dumpster fire? But what I have found is that they may think that, but what they always do, they never come down to the level of organization. They always bring the organization up to them. And so if you can sell them on the vision of where you're going, and that was one of the things that I think brought Spencer here, is I was telling him, hey, we're going to manage 25,000 doors. If you can do a really great job of selling really talented people on the vision of where you're headed, they get excited about things like that. The last thing they want to do is go work for a bank, right? Or something like 9 to 5. So the fourth thing I would say, and this is a little bit, we got this from Who, is I put this together between 2 things. Make sure they're a hell yeah. When you hire somebody, you should be like, it ought to be so incredibly obvious that they're the right person that we call it a hell yeah. And if they're not a hell yeah, they ought to be a no. And one of the things that I think a lot of mistakes that people make are that they will go through an interview process and they just want a little bit more information. They're not sure. I will tell you, a hell yeah, you're like sure the whole way through the process.
Yeah.
And really, they turn the page on you and you feel like you're selling the organization to them. That's the type of relationship you want throughout the interview process.
Yeah.
All right.
Last thing I would say here is just, I think the real A players, if you sell them on the vision, they also see an incredible opportunity. Like they see it, they see how they may not know all the pieces, but they see how they could come in and really help the company. And I'm just thinking of several people that we've hired over the years that have just been game changers for us. And
Yeah.
it's always worth waiting and saying no to the people you need to say no to and not making quick hires. We've also made all these mistakes and made quick hires and said that was completely wrong.
Yeah, the short-term pain of an open spot
Yeah.
is not worth like prolonging that pain by putting the wrong person in that seat.
Yeah.
All right,
Right.
number 2 is you really go from managing to more of being a coach, more of being a leader. When you talk about getting from 1,500 doors to 5,000, keep in mind you're probably growing towards north of 50 people at this point in the organization. And when it pushes past 50, it's hard to know everybody's name. You still can at 50, but it's starting to become harder and harder. At 100, it's probably almost impossible to know everybody's name. And especially in a growing organization where you're adding people at all times. So you want to make sure that you are that you're growing your leadership skills, that you're coaching your managers, because keep in mind, there's a management layer underneath this. Now, all of a sudden, a leader is coaching a manager on the things that they learned, which is those management skills, right? You're almost teaching those skills that we saw at the 1 to 3 million mark. And it's just really powerful when you teach somebody to run a great meeting, when you teach somebody to do a great one-to-one. That's all I really have to say about coaching. Last thing, yeah, you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Last thing is just talking about leverage. This is more of a mindset. What I found is, and really this mindset should go throughout the organization as you're growing it. I think about leverage a lot now as I think about my time, and it even becomes more so as the organization grows. Where am I spending my time? You don't have the time to spend with everybody in the organization. So you need to be able to pick the right people that you spend time with and coach and grow. I think about how am I leveraging the things that I know? I saw another Maxwell quote recently that said, you essentially can't teach what you don't know. And so, how are you going to continue to grow the organization if you're not spending time sharpening your own axe? And that's a form of leverage. It's really important. This is one of the weird things because if you've, like me, have gone from being an individual contributor to starting to be a leader, one of the things it'll feel like is I need to be doing something. My brain is wired like, I got to always be doing something because I feel like, oh man, if I show up to work and they don't see me doing something, or heck, I need to show up to work so they can see me doing something. But what I have found is that actually it's really important to Spencer. It's really important to Graham and Gray and the people in our organization that I do spend time reading and thinking and growing as a leader because they want me to get to the next level so that I can help increase their opportunities to manage more and lead more and have more things to do at Evernest. And so as you grow the organization, your time spent doing should start to shrink, and your time spent like thinking and coaching becomes like infinitely more than your time doing, if that makes. And it's a hard thing because you feel, oh man, um, I'm not leasing houses anymore. I'm not answering all the phone calls. And I wonder if they hate me for not answering all the phone calls. But the answer is they love you because you're going to help give them more opportunities.
When I think about this also, I think trust has so much to do with this, right? So the people who are around here, there's just a lot of I'm just thinking there's a lot of trust. I don't worry about Matthew if I don't see Matthew in the office, that if he's supposed to be working, I know he's going to be working, right? He's always going to be thinking about what's best for the company. So I'm not worried about that. And we don't expend a lot of energy on those things, wondering, hey, who's working, who's not working. At the end of the day, we'll see the proof will be we have the scorecards. We know what's being done because we're seeing the proof of it and we're measuring it. But ultimately, when you're leading people, there's got to be a lot of trust back and forth.
All right, Elizabeth asked a question. Who's been your greatest manager and what did you take away from that experience that you implement today? Look, we have a ton of really great managers around here, honestly. I think the things that I've taught you, Elizabeth, or the things that I've learned, a lot of them they've taught me. My people analyzers or my one-to-ones were a certain way. And because of some like great managers like Matt or Graham, when I look at their people analyzers compared to my people analyzers, I've realized that mine were falling short. And that's a great way you actually learn from the great managers in your organization. But look, I think that's the point of recruiting A players is finding great people. They'll actually teach you more things. And then we have some incredible managers right now in the organization. And when we think about managers, we think about them as what we call director of operations. They're running markets for us. They're handling like here in Birmingham or they're in Little Rock and they're managing that market for us. So we've been very fortunate, but we haven't been like lucky. We've just been super intentional about hiring great people.
I would also say, Elizabeth, Matthew probably has had a little bit of a disadvantage because he never really had a manager, right? So he worked for a company shortly after school, but he was out buying and selling houses himself pretty quickly after that. And then when the market crashed 2018, Evernest started. So he really had to be his own manager. So I would say if I were thinking who taught Matthew a lot, I would say a lot of the books he read, experiences of other people. And then as you add people to your company, you pick up great things that they bring into the company from what's made them successful.
Yeah, one thing, Charlie Munger, who just recently passed away, he was Warren Buffett's partner, says is that there are billion-dollar ideas in a history book. And I read a lot of biographies. I read a lot of the entrepreneurs that have grown organizations, and just allow them. Another thing he says is like learning from the eminent dead. A lot of these people have since passed away, like Sam Walton's biography, or Walt Disney, or some of these people. They've long since passed, but I can read and learn what they did and how they handled problems as they grew their organizations. All right, let's get moving. Remember to get your questions in. And look, I'm not going to stay here too long, but when you grow your organization past 10 million, then there's really three things that I think about a lot is same page meetings. So this is simply the idea is that I meet weekly with my leaders. And my whole goal, I did some of these today, is to make sure we're on the same page, right? What are you like? Let's make sure that we don't get too disconnected. I don't want to wait till a monthly one-to-one to make sure that I'm connected to them, because we've got to make sure that there is at the top of the organization that there's a really tight knit, and that we all see the vision the same way, and that they, if I need to paint a vision for what I want to happen, that they see it very clearly so that they can go do it, right? Because at this point, it's hard for me to go do almost anything. I can't even answer my emails. If y'all saw my emails, you would just, if anybody knows an executive assistant that wants a job, please have them contact me, because I'm hiring one right now. But it's, the point is, I don't have time to get anything done except maybe some very big high priority things. But if the organization that are running all the functions, I want to make sure that we stay tightly connected. So that's what a same page meeting is. It's described really well in the book. It's an EOS book, and it's called, I'll think of it in a second. The second one is vision. I talked a little bit about this. Look, my job is, I think of us as like hacking our way through a jungle, and somebody's got to go up and climb up the tree and say, number one, where are we headed? And number two, is the organization headed in the right direction? And so one of the things that I consistently do is paint a vision of what the future looks like. If you think about your team, it's incredibly important for them to understand where the organization is going. And if they have a crystal clear picture of where the organization is going, it actually, number one, it motivates them, but it also helps them make better decisions, right? Because if I think about it through the lens of where I'm headed, I'm more likely to make a better decision than I don't know where we're headed, and I don't know what we're doing, and I don't have any idea how we're getting there. But if I paint a picture of where we're headed, then that's going to be really good for them, and they can make better decisions. The challenge is I cannot make all the decisions anymore, right? You just can't. So how do you give them the vision and then the kind of like the framework with which to make those decisions? And then the third thing is, as you grow an organization, you start to, Andy Stanley talks about, like, you look around the room and you become the most powerful voice in the room. And Spencer's known me a long time. He may think that's pretty funny, but when you have an organization of 400 people, and the perception of you is that you care, for whatever reason, right or wrong, you carry more weight, right? Your word carries more weight. And so you need to make sure that, number one, that your word doesn't, like you saying something that like demotivate people just because of the power of it. But you also want to make sure that like you use that leverage that you do have, the influence that you do have, to create positive change. If Spencer, or let's say, like, if somebody like down in our organization texts somebody and says, hey, that was a great job, that's going to make that person feel really good. If I text that person and say, great job, that's just a whole different level. If the CEO does, then that's going to be a whole different level. And as you start to grow your organization, you should be you should use that in very positive ways, and that can provide a lot of leverage for your organization. And the thing I tell my team is use me like that. Hey, Matthew, so and so did such a great job. I actually heard something about this today, and I'm gonna text this guy. And I said, I'm gonna text this guy and tell him I heard, like, it made it all the way to me. You can imagine we have 30 plus markets, we have 400 people, we have 14,000 homes. What you did made it all the way to me. And I wanted you to know that I appreciate and acknowledge. That's influence, that's leverage. And of course, that probably is going to make that person feel really good that what he or she did made it all the way to me. All right.
All right.
Put a bow on it. Any questions? I know we have a few from JR, and we're definitely going to answer those, JR. They're just a little bit different subject. There's some marketing and sales questions. We've talked for about an hour and 20 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? And then that was our last slide. We're going to wrap it up with any questions. All right, we'll start answering some of JR's questions. How about that? JR says, in a heavily saturated PM market where consumer has the benefit of price shopping, what closing techniques beyond building value do you use to hook the prospect without lowering price on each call? Spencer, that's probably right down your alley.
Closing techniques. I don't know. When I think about this, I think a couple things. I think the group, if all things are equal and you're looking at a group of property managers, I think the one who adds more value or adds the most value wins. I think because I think that person or that group is going to build trust faster. And what we've learned is really it's just all about trust. That is the key thing is people buy from who they trust and who they like. So if you're likable and you can add as much value. So one of the things that we like to do is we honestly want to help people succeed whether they hire us or not. So this is the way I look at marketing. I'm like, how can we just give? And then when somebody needs to hire a property manager, then they'll look to us. So some of the ways that we do that are content. We create helpful content. That's probably the biggest thing that we do. We've got great salespeople who want to build rapport as quickly as possible. So I think, to me, it's not necessarily a closing technique as much as it is. I think actually Gary Vaynerchuk has a book. It's like jab hook, something like that. And the whole premise of the book is add value, close. And if you listen to Alex Hormozy, he says the same thing: add value, close. For every one time that you're asking for the sale, you should be giving something away 4 or 5 times.
I think you had a sales webinar last month, and those guys are really good. I know Mark Ainley in Chicago is fantastic at the giveaway, right? Like
so we have our website. The page is evernest.co/webinars, and you can find that sales webinar, and you can listen to Mark Ainley and Michael Kraus talk about that, and it's really good.
All right, second question, he had a marketing question. He said, what has been the best marketing technique to get the phones to ring? Back in the day, a new business got the phone to ring with the yellow page ad. What works best today?
To get the phone ring, paid ads is going to be the fastest way you can get the phone to ring. That's it. If you want phones to ring quickly, it's a lot like the yellow pages. Back in the day, you're paying for placement, and more people are searching Google, and so you're paying to have your ad put in front of them. That's simply the quickest way to make the phone ring. But if you don't want to pay for all that, then you've got to build an organic machine that is able to reach out into the internet and be found by people who are searching and be shareable. So and to us, that's more of our content strategy. It's a long-term strategy. It's nothing quick. Paid ads is quick. Content, long game.
All right, last question, unless somebody pops one in the Q&A. With all the automation and AI getting in between a company and the necessary communication we need to retain clients, from a leasing standpoint in your business, when does the tenant prospect receive the first human touch? I actually think that it is the second interaction. Until about 3 or 4 months ago, it was the first at first touch, but we have automated the first connection with our residents. And if they reach out to us, the first response is an automated response. That's actually worked really well, candidly. But if they follow back, respond back, then there's a human on the other side. We have about 25 team members that are currently working on leasing. All right, that was great. Spencer, thank you. Appreciate you doing another one of these, putting these things together. They're
You did all the talking. I was just sitting here moving the controls around.